Okay, so obviously the new laws are coming in on the 29th of March this year. There's a link here, and I'm happy for the team to send out my PowerPoint presentation as well. So if you do want to subscribe to any of the email updates with Consumer Affairs, click on that link. And whenever any new information is sent through, it'll be sent through to you. And our Consumer Affairs has been a really good resource for us over the last couple of years, because it's been happening for the last couple of years, this planning. And they did do that community consultation, which was the Fairer, Safer Housing Review, and 132 reforms were created. And during COVID, some of those reforms actually came into play as well. So we're not going to be hit with the 132 right on the 29th of March. We already do have some that we're working through and have been working through for the last 12 months. What I'm looking forward to, and anyone that's been in real estate for a while will know this, that we work with so much grey area in real estate. There's never been that black and white that, you know, this is the way it works. And what we've actually been given are some really good detailed fact sheets and guidelines, which will outline all of the residential processes, or nearly all of them, to all of our clients, our landlords and our tenants. So if you want to have a read of those, then you can just download them from this link here. Consumer Affairs are adding to them all the time, and they are creating more. So I like the fact that we're going to have that, you know, black and white and not so much grey in the future, which will make everyone's jobs easier. So the regulations was what came out a couple of weeks ago. If you want to download a copy, it's only a 200-page read, so it's not quite as bad as the bill that was put out in 2018 that was a 500-page read and took me two weeks of solid study to understand. On the 29th of March, the old regulations are revoked and the new regulations kick in. I think Luke might have said that there's around 1.5 million Victorians living in rental housing across Victoria. So this is a massive shift. So the new terms that we have to get used to, and I really can't get used to them. Tenants will be called renters. A landlord will be called a residential rental provider or rental provider, and a lease will be a residential rental agreement or rental agreement. Agent stays as agent, but that's the wording change that we've all got to get used to. And after 22 years in the industry, trying to reprogram my brain, I have to say I'm not going to be very good at it tonight. And for some reason, my PowerPoint just stopped working. All right, so let's have a think about what things I can tell you while, yeah, it's not clicking forward. It's blank. You gotta love it when technology doesn't work. I ran a conference last year, and my computer froze with 100 people on board, and I could no longer talk to anyone. So that was fabulous. If not, what I'm going to do, I'm going to set up my computer next to me, and I can set up my little thing, and I can read off that one while we're waiting for that one to get fixed. And surprisingly enough, I actually know it off by heart, but I need the little points there to remind myself what I need to talk about. No problem. All right. So first of all, penalty units. So penalty units are fines which can be imposed for doing the wrong thing under the Act. And one of the biggest changes in, I guess, the way that they've put forward these changes is that penalty units have been increased significantly, the multiple of the penalty unit. So one penalty unit is $165.22, and that increases on the 1st of July each year by 2.5%. So I'll give you an example of a penalty unit. The day it's agreed that a tenant moves into a property, the property has to be A, vacant, and B, reasonably clean. So that's been in the Act forever, but it's always had 0 penalty units associated with it. With the new legislation, that will have 60 penalty units on it. So if we let a property and we can't provide vacant possession for that tenant who signed a lease and is ready to move in, and potentially if the situation went to vacate, then they could proportion those penalty units. So we just have to be really careful that we've got enough wiggle room between tenancies, and we also have enough, cleaners on standby to make sure that we're handing the property over in a reasonably clean condition. But as I said, it's not going to be a massive issue because we always make sure that we've got enough wiggle room and our tenants move out on time and they leave it perfectly clean, and then our new tenants move in. So it's all perfect. So changes that have already been put into place. Dr. Heather Holst was appointed in September 2018, and her role is to pull all of this together. So she focuses on renters' rights, but she also does try and make sure that it's balanced across the legislation. Long-term leases are available now, so you can do a 5-year fixed-term lease if you would like. A tenant can request it. You can say yes or no. If you do want to do a 5-year fixed-term lease, you just have to use a Form 2, which is a standard form that's been created. One of the other changes that came into place in 2019 was the fact that we can increase the rents every 12 months rather than every 6. Pets was a big one. Some people are not happy about pets in rental properties. I shouldn't say this, I always say it, but I shouldn't say it when I'm recorded. It might be used against me later. I have pets and I have children. My children generally cause more damage than my pets. Saying that though, I don't want my miniature pony living in my house. So the way it works now with pets is a tenant does have to apply for a pet in a form approved by CAV. You then have 14 days to action that pet request. The only way you can say no once you've been given that pet request as a landlord is to apply to vacate within 14 days for a hearing to be able to say no to that particular pet. If you ignore it and just hope it goes away, then it's automatic consent within 14 days. And the other option is you just sign off on it and say it's allowed. So just be aware that unless the pet is completely unreasonable for your property, like a Alaskan Malamute on a 3rd floor apartment potentially, where there's no outdoor area, then really that pet is going to be allowed to stay. So my idea is you're best to just, get some special agreements, special terms, and allow the pet to stay there. I own a property in South Yarra. I have a lovely couple in there. They've got a French bulldog that goes to doggy daycare every day. They've lived there for 3 years. They're the most perfect tenants, and you wouldn't even know the dog was there. So I have nothing against pets in rental properties, as long as the property is suitable for the pet. Rental applications and discrimination. So there will be areas that we can't ask a tenant, or questions that we can't ask a tenant on their application forms anymore, such as, has the previous agent ever made a claim on their bond, or have they ever been to vacate? And we also can't ask for a bank statement that shows daily transactions, but we can ask for a bank balance as such if we need to verify their income. There's also discrimination, and that's a Form 3. So the discrimination has come in under applications as well. So we can't unlawfully discriminate, or you as landlords can't unlawfully discriminate or request or instruct us to unlawfully discriminate against someone, due to their race or sexuality or any of those sort of things. We do have a statement that we are required to give to tenants upon application as well. So we just need to ensure that we are adhering to those sort of rules. So there will be disclosure requirements, so a disclosure statement that you as a landlord will need to sign off on prior to a tenant signing a lease for a property. And they are if a property has an embedded electricity network. Now that's more of a city thing, and I'm a country agent as well, so we actually don't have any embedded electricity networks on our portfolio. But say you own a property and AGL owns the rights to that property and they are the only choice of supplier, then you would have to disclose that to the tenant because they can't negotiate their own rates or special rates for the property. If there's been a homicide in the property in the last 5 years, you will need to disclose that as well. It doesn't say anything about suicide or natural causes. The Act or regulations do just say homicide. If the premises complies with the rental minimum standards, and I will go through those in detail, so let's just sort of park them to the side for now, but you will have to disclose that it does. If there's been a repair notice, from the 31st of December 2021, if there's been a repair notice in the last 3 years relating to mould or damp caused by or related to the building structure. If there's any outstanding recommendations for works to be completed from a gas or electrical safety point check. If a property is heritage listed, you have to also do gas, electrical and pool barrier safety checks, and the gas and electrical needs to be done every 2 years and the pool barrier safety check every 4. You will then have to disclose that on the statement before a tenant moves into a property, the last date that was completed. And then if there other disclosure is things like if you know that the property's been contaminated because of the use, trafficking or cultivation of a drug of dependence in the last 5 years, asbestos, but that's only based on an inspection by a suitably qualified person, be affected by building or planning application notices, things like combustible cladding. So that's been a really big one, particularly in our city areas. The La Trobe Tower was a big one where there was, I think, $5.5 million damage caused to the building due to that combustible cladding. So if you don't know about it, that means you're not affected by it, so don't worry about it. Advertising or rent, we can only offer properties for a fixed price. So I can't say, hey, offers over $320 a week or offers between $3 and $320. I also can't say that the property's $320 a week, but then you've got to pay an extra $10 a week to use the gym facilities. We also can't create rental bids. So say I'm doing open for inspection and regional, I was chatting to the girls today and they were saying that their market's really strong. So we do often or sometimes have tenants that come forward and go, I really want this property. Can I put an extra $10 a week on my application? If that happens, you can accept it because it's unprompted. You haven't asked for it. But I couldn't then go back to other applicants and go, hey, I've got a higher offer. Would you like to match it? So we just have to be very, very careful. As a general rule, if someone does offer higher, the girls will obviously come to you and explain it. It doesn't mean they're going to be the best applicants for the property though. So you've always got to choose the best applicant rather than the person that's willing to pay that little bit more. Rental agreements, so there will be certain terms which are prohibited in rental agreements as well, and we are getting a standard form rental agreement prescribed form from CAV, and that's been provided in the regulations already. There's 30 points on that form and it's a really detailed form, so I'm actually really happy with the way it reads because it takes away a lot of that grey area. Tenants and landlords know exactly what the rules are, and so do we. So we will need to use that form moving forward. There's a few things in the old agreements that can't carry forward, but it's nothing too major. So I think moving forward, it's going to be better for the industry having everyone back to that prescribed form. One thing to remember as well, if you offer a lease to a tenant and they sign it and you don't sign it, it's still a legally binding agreement. So just be aware that once you've offered it, if they sign the lease, you can't then change your mind. It is a legally binding agreement. So just make sure before you instruct the team to sign up a tenancy renewal that you're sure that you want to keep that tenant on again. Keys. So if you have a 3-bedroom house and you have 3 tenants who sign, or renters that sign the lease, you have to provide 3 sets of keys to those renters to access and enjoy the premises. So either be prepared to give the team the right amount of keys per tenant who's going to be living there, or they'll be able to go and cut the keys on your behalf. But you do have to hand over the correct amount of keys for the amount of tenants that sign the lease. Deadlocks will need to be fitted to every external door as well. So if there's no other security barrier preventing access. So just make sure that if you've got a timber door right on the street, for example, and it doesn't have a deadlock, be prepared to have to put a deadlock on that door. If the door was unable to be fitted with a deadlock, you know, if it's a glass sliding door and there's no way you can put a deadlock on it, then you wouldn't have to. But other than that, just be prepared to maybe have to upgrade your locks to a deadlock when the Act actually comes in. Rental payments. So we always use electronic versions for payments for rent, which is great. Tenants can either pay into trust account, direct debit. We try and move away from cash as much as possible. We need to make sure that we give tenants a free version as well. And if a tenant does want to use Centrepay, then they can. Our Centrepay tenants during COVID in particular were really, really good tenants because they had that constant income coming in. So we were very unaffected by rent arrears compared to what we've been looking at in the Melbourne market, where they've been severely affected by rent arrears. So, for example, I don't know how the guys went with theirs, but we've got 300 under management. We had 3 tenants at the height of COVID that actually went through the reduced rent. So we had a very low number compared to what we're seeing in Melbourne, where it can be up to 50% on some portfolios. Late rents. Okay, I don't like the late rent process. I'll be really honest with that. I'm very black and white. I think rent's due, you pay it. You don't pay it, landlords can't pay mortgage, but that's okay. So the way the late rent is going to work is tenants will have a strike system. And the way it works is the tenant's 14 days late with rent. On the 15th day, you can serve a notice to vacate. That will then give them another 14 days plus postage to pay the rent. If they pay the full amount of rent before the end of that termination date, so technically if you're doing Regi Post, maybe another 21 days, then it's 1 strike, no VCAT. If they pay no money from day 1, then it's straight to VCAT, so that's okay. They're allowed to do that 4 times every 12 months, and it resets every 12 months. So if they did it 4 times in the first 12 months, then the next year they have 1 late rent again, it's reset and it's number 1 again. The 5th time they do it in a 12-month period, however, even if they pay the rent between the date the notice was given and that termination date in the notice, that extra 21 days, you can get before a member. And you may get possession, you may get a payment plan, you may get an adjournment of hearing. So just be prepared that the rent arrears process may push out a little bit more than what it has in the past. However, saying that, I have no tenants that play this game. And if you do have a tenant that does sort of start getting severely in arrears, they have actually brought in the fact that we can go for compensation on the 3rd occurrence after you've already served 2 notices. So that could be a quicker way to get before a member at VCAT to try and nip it in the bud, to try and get them to be a little bit more compliant without allowing it to get to that 5th strike in that 12-month period. So there's ways around it. I think we just have to be really on top of it. And one other thing, we just have to be really careful about the quality of tenant that we're putting in. And we need to make sure that they can pay the rent from the very beginning. And I think COVID's really taught us that more than anything, that, you know, they really did look at 30% of a rent. If you're paying more than 30% of your income on rent, that's considered hardship. So we need to make sure that we're staying within that, under that threshold as well. Bonds. So unless your weekly rent is more than $900 a week, you can only take a month's rent as bond. So currently it's anything over $351 a week, we can take a higher bond. With the new legislation, anything over $900 a week. So for country areas like us, probably none of our clients will be taking higher bonds. But say you had a fully furnished property and it was $500 a week, you can apply to VCAT to ask VCAT to allow you to take a higher bond for that property, because you need to cover off on all those furnishings, for example. A lot of owners also say, pets, can I have a pet bond? No, you can't. Pet bonds are illegal. They always have been illegal, but some agents have processed them in the past, but in the future, definitely not, and it's been illegal forever. We will be able to take top-up bonds, though, for long-term leases. So if you did do a 5-year fixed-term agreement, you can top up the bond at the end of the first 5 year, as long as you've got another 5 years left on the lease. So that's a consideration as well for that one. We also can take bonds for modifications if restoration's more than 500, and I'll go through that when I get to the modifications as well. One other thing just to consider, and the guys will look after you and you'll be protected in this aspect, but when a renter moves out of a property, we only have a very short window to finalise that bond. And it's always been 10 business days. But what's going to happen in the future is a tenant will be able to instigate that bond claim process themselves. So if they hand back the keys, they can say, right, I've applied for my bond back, and that sets the clock, it sets the timer. And if you don't then either agree to it or apply to VCAT within 14 days, 10 business days, the bond will automatically be refunded to the tenant. So when the team say to you, if you want to go through the property, just make sure you do it right when the tenant vacates, there's a reason for that. We have to actually finalise those bonds really quickly. And you want to make sure that you finalise that bond before the tenant has an opportunity to apply for it, and then it might not be available anymore. Okay, modifications. This is a big one, and it's one that quite a few owners have been a little concerned about. Before I go through the modifications though, I just want you guys to all be aware that any modification that is done, even if it's a prescribed modification, has to be restored at the end of the tenancy back to original conditions subject to fair wear and tear. So your tenant can't come in and put up 100 picture hooks on the wall and then walk out and leave 100 picture hooks on the wall. It's got to be restored back to original condition. The other thing is, a lot of owners think, oh, they're going to come in and renovate my house. They're going to do this, they're going to do that. They're not. They never have. And realistically, this hasn't changed a hell of a lot. People always have to ask for modifications anyway. It's just the prescribed list that we have to work through. So for me, tenants are going to want to come in and put pitch hooks on walls, TV brackets on the walls, you know, secure items of furniture so it's not a risk to kids climb the bookshelf and it falls down. Those sort of things, they're really minor things. And remembering they have to restore. So let's go through them first. So they could install picture hooks for screws for wall mount shelves or brackets on surfaces other than exposed brick or concrete walls. So that's, you know, putting their pictures on the walls. Easy. Wall anchoring devices on surfaces other than exposed brick or concrete walls to secure items of furniture. So your TV bracket. So think about this. As a landlord, it could be worth you going into the property prior to a tenant moving in and popping a universal TV bracket on the lounge room wall, so that in the hope that the tenant won't then go in and want to do it every time. You might want to go in and just put some picture hooks where you think a tenant might want to hang pictures in the hope that a tenant won't come in and then do that and then have to restore it each time. Because I think people do have a right to make their property feel like their home. And I don't actually have an issue with people putting up picture hooks or hanging TVs as long as it's done correctly and it doesn't cause damage and it's rectified at the end. They can put in LED light globes as long as they don't require new light fittings. Water efficient shower head as long as they retain the original. Installation of blind or cord anchors. And I'm actually surprised that one came in because it's more of a landlord's responsibility, I feel, for that, not a tenant. So as I said, I actually think that that's more of a landlord than a tenant anyway. They can put in a security system or alarm system as long as it doesn't impact on the privacy of neighbours. And these are the ones which are portable, which can be easily removed so they don't cause damage, they're not hardwired. Installation of hardware mounted child safety gates on walls other than exposed brick or concrete walls. So that's the first bit. And then we've got non-permanent window film for insulation, reduced heat transfer and privacy. Wireless doorbell, replacement of curtains if the originals are retained. Adhesive child safety locks on drawers and doors. Pressure mounted child safety gates and a lock on the letterbox. So these are the items, all of those items are the things that a tenant can do without your consent. So they'll just come in, they'll make the changes, but at the end of the tenancy, they have to bring it back to original condition subject to fair wear and tear, unless you say to them, do you know what, just leave it there, it's fine, in which case they don't have to restore. Then we've got a second list. Now this is a list that tenants can do and they have to ask permission, but you can't unreasonably refuse consent. So installation of picture hooks for screws or wall mounts on shelves and brackets on exposed brick or concrete walls. Hardware mounted child safety gates on exposed brick or concrete walls. Wall anchoring devices on exposed brick or concrete walls to secure items of furniture. Draft proofing in homes without open fluid gas heating, including installing weather seals, gapping, caulking, gap filling around windows, doors, skirting and floorboards. Again, as a landlord, I personally wouldn't feel comfortable letting the tenant do that. So if I was the landlord and that request came through to me, I would pay a tradesman to go and do that, because you can cause a little bit of mess if you're not qualified in that area. And I know from renovating my house with my husband, he thinks he's a tradie, he's not. Installation by a suitably qualified person of an alarm system. So this is one which is properly wired in. It has to be done by a proper tradesman though, and you have to get an invoice for that as well, and it can't look directly into neighbours. Then installation of fly screens on doors and windows. And again, I'm actually surprised this came in on the tenant list. I thought fly screens would have come in under minimum standards for a landlord. So if a tenant wants fly screens on doors or windows, they do have to ask permission. It's done at their cost, and then they restore it at the end of the tenancy. Vegetable or herb garden, secure letterbox, painting of rented premises, and modifications to secure external gates as long as it's not multi-unit. So let's go back to painting. Tenants don't generally want to paint your house either. It's a lot of work to paint a property. If they do want to do it though, you can take a restoration bond or you can request one. So say they want to paint one wall and it's a feature wall. And if you wanted to paint that back to white at the end of a tenancy, it would only cost $200. You can't charge a restoration bond because it's less than $500. But say they wanted to paint the lounge room and the lounge room's huge and it would cost $600 for a tradie to come in at the end of the tenancy and bring that back to white, then you can ask them to pay a restoration bond and you'd lodge that with the RTVA. And then at the end of the tenancy, if they don't bring it back to the condition that it was agreed upon, you can use that, make a claim on the bond to pay a tradie to then bring it back to that condition. So I actually don't mind the modifications. I think they're a lot clearer than what we've had in the past. Tenants don't have 10, 20 grand in their bank going, hey, let's go renovate someone else's house for them. But they do want to make the home a home and they do want to put up picture hooks and maybe TV brackets. So I actually think it's quite fair when you look at it in that way. Maintaining properties. So there's a lot of things around this. For those people that do have older style properties, you do have to ensure that you maintain that property correctly. It doesn't have to be perfect, but if you have something in the property, it does have to be in working order. So for example, you might have a situation where you have a tenant who is living in the property and the gas heater carks it, and you get the tradie in and they decommission it. And your tenant says, do you know what? I don't really like the gas heater. I'd really love a split system instead. So you put that in for them. Then the next time round, that tenant moves out, you've got another tenant moving in, and you advertise the property as, you know, gas heater, not operational, won't be fixed. It goes in the lease and the condition report. Even though the new tenant is aware that that is an item that is not included in the tenancy, they have a right to serve you with a notice of repair, and that would become an urgent repair for you to bring that up to working standard again. So my recommendation is if you have something in the property that is not working, it has to be removed. Otherwise, if it can be seen, it has to be working. So just keep that in the back of your mind. And particularly for some of those old gas heaters, you know, they've got asbestos flues and they're expensive to remove. So people often just go, just leave it there. It's too expensive to get rid of. It's too expensive not to get rid of. Just pull it out and start again. And that was actually a court case that went to Supreme Court back in 2016, and it was based, it's Shields versus Valliopolis. So if you want to look it up, I'm a bit of a nerd with legislation, but it's actually a really interesting case. So you can Google it and have a look. But just remember, anything in your property has to be in working order. If it's not in working order, remove it before a new tenant moves in. Minimum standards. So landlords will be given a period of time to bring their properties up to the minimum standard that is a requirement under the Act. A couple of things with this, that with the minimum standard, after the 29th of March 2021, your property has to comply with nearly all of them. Okay, not all of them, because some of them are phased in over time to give you a period of time to adjust to them. But if your property doesn't meet minimum standards, so say we lease out your property on the 15th of April and you don't have a functioning heater in the main living area, fixed heater, sorry, in the main living area, that would become an urgent repair to fix. And potentially, if that was taken to VCAT, there is a potential of a penalty unit fine of 60 points as well, so just under $10,000. So my recommendation is make sure your property adheres to minimum standards after a property is let after 29th of March. Now, what they are: number one, functioning deadlocks. So we went through that one before. That's the minimum standard if your property is let after 29th of March 2021. Vermin-proof bins. So a council bin, it has to be for rubbish and recycling, bin with a lid. That should be pretty easy for everyone. Toilets have to be in good working order. They also have to be connected to, sewage system or wastewater treatment system or another system approved by local council. They have to be in a room which is intended to be used as a toilet area as well. So in a bathroom, in a laundry, or in a separate enclosed structure. There was something floating around Facebook a couple of weeks ago where there was stairwell, and there was one in the middle of the stairwell. That's not allowed. Don't do that. Bathroom facilities, reasonable supply of hot and cold water. Shower heads have to have a 3-star energy rating as well, unless due to the age of the plumbing, or you might have a gravity fed hot water system or something like that, and it won't work properly. You can then put in a 2-star. You must have a basin plus a bath or shower. So you don't have to have both bath or shower. Kitchen facilities, you have to have a sink, a stovetop, and a food preparation area, and any oven in the property has to be in good working order as well. You have to have a minimum of 2 burners for the cooktop. Laundry facilities. If you do have laundry facilities, and every property doesn't have to, but if you do, has to have access to a reasonable supply of hot and cold water. Okay, so if you only have cold water for the laundry, you would have to get hot water connected to that. Structurally sound and weatherproof. So you'll have to tick off to say that that property is structurally sound and weatherproof. You also will need to tick off that it's free from mould and damp caused by or related to the building structure. So rising damp, falling damp, roof leaks causing mould, that sort of thing. And mould has really come through quite clearly in the Act because it has been a massive problem over the years. So I'm actually thinking that things are going to get a bit clearer and better in the future due to mould, because it's been outlined better in the Act. Electrical safety. So your properties will have to adhere to electrical safety from 29th of March 2023. What that means is you'll need to have RCDs, residual current devices, and circuit breakers on your fuse box. So those old fuse boxes that have the ceramic, they're no longer going to be allowed. So for those that do have older style properties, you will need to ensure that they come up to that new electrical safety by the 29th of March 2023. So you've got a bit of time to prepare for that one, or when a new lease is signed after that date. Window coverings have to be on all bedrooms or any room intended to be used as a bedroom area, plus lounge rooms. So originally the draft regulations said the main living area. Now it's saying all living areas. So if you don't have blinds which reasonably block light and provide reasonable privacy to a renter, you will need to get them upgraded. Windows all must open and close, and I've got a question for Luke on this one later. All must open and close and have functioning latches to secure them. So, for example, if you have a sash window and the cords are broken and you can't physically keep it up in the closed or open position, then potentially that would have to be repaired. And latches to secure them. So you put the latch on, you go to the outside, you lock it from the inside, go to the outside, you go to open, it doesn't open, then that's secure. Lighting, so properties will have to have access to natural, borrowed or artificial light. Ventilation, so this is a new requirement that came in. It wasn't in the draft regs, it came through in the final regs. Each property must comply with a set performance requirements when it comes to ventilation in properties as well. Heating, so different to what was in the draft regs again. Basically, between 29th of March 2021 and 28th of March 2023, all properties are to have a fixed heater in the main living area. Now, by 2023, they want to have energy efficient heaters installed. And what that means is either like a split system with a 2-star energy rating or above, a gas-based heater, 2-star energy rating or above, a hydronic heater or a ducted heater with an outlet in the main living area, or a solid fuel burning heater, Canara. So they're your 4 options. Now, say you've got an apartment though, and you're located on the 3rd floor, and the body corporate says, no, you can't install anything on the outside of the property and you don't have a balcony. In that particular property, you would not have to upgrade it to an energy efficient heater because the owners' corporation rules prohibit it. Or you might have council rules that say you can't do it. The other thing is, say you're on the 3rd floor and you've got to get a crane or a scissor lift to put it in, and a normal install for a normal apartment would be $2,500. But for your apartment, because of the extra works that would be required, it's going to cost you $5,000, then you wouldn't have to install the energy efficient heater because the price prohibits you from having to do it. Okay, so if you have a house, make sure you do have that energy efficient heater. You can buy time by putting in a fixed heater for 2 years. However, I suggest you probably just bite the bullet now and put in a split system if required. I've got a property in Geelong and I replaced mine for my tenant a couple of weeks ago. She emailed me and said, can I have a new aircon? The old one's making noise and it's an old box one. And I knew I had to do it anyway. I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll buy you a new one, job done. Took the old one out though, so that she can't, turn around and ask for it to be repaired later. Okay, safety of properties. So safety, we have to get our smoke alarms done every 12 months. Now, most agents and owners are really used to this anyway. We do use an outsourced company to do this for us to make sure that our properties are safe and compliant. And if you're a landlord that thinks that you can just go out and just check the button and think it's fine, I very much suggest that that is not going to fly moving forward. You do need to be a suitably qualified person and you need to make sure that they're done up to the manufacturer's specifications as well. So definitely just get it, pay the money, get it done, and then you've got no liability if anything ever goes wrong. What they have also brought into play though, we will need to get gas and electrical safety checks done every 2 years. By a licensed registered professional. So if you're not an electrician, you're not a plumber, gas plumber, you can't go and do this either. The trigger for that is you've basically got 2 years to comply with that one unless a new lease starts. So say you lease out a property in June this year, that's your trigger to get your gas and electrical safety checks done. Now, they've got to check everything in the property. So if you have gas in the property and you've got to, because usually you've probably had your gas heater done every 2 years, but you need to get the stove top, the hot water unit, anything that carries gas in the property except for gas bottles on barbecues. Everything else does need to be checked and signed off on. Your electric, they need to check all the power points, the light fittings, the fuse box, the wiring. Like there's a lot of points of checks to do for the electric as well. So just make sure that's outsourced and the guys will put you in touch with who can go and do that and sign off on it to make sure it's all done correctly. If you have an older style house, I'm suggesting to get these checks done now. Because what they will do when the tradies go through and they do your safety checks, they'll say, hey, you're fine for now, but in 2 years when the higher regs come in for the minimum standards for the electrical, for example, for your fuse box, you're going to have to upgrade your property or you're going to have to upgrade the wiring or your fuse box. And the cost will be around this. And that way you can start building a budget in place so that you know what money you're going to have to spend in the future on that property. And that's what I've done with my property in Geelong. I've already had the guys go out there and prepare a report for me so that I can start budgeting for what I'm going to have to do to get it compliant by 2023. Condition reports. So when a tenant moves into a property, we do condition reports and our condition reports are very, very detailed. A couple of changes with condition reports. A tenant will have 5 days to return them instead of 3. A condition report has to be completed regardless of whether we take a bond or not. We always take a bond anyway, but there have been some instances where you might be renting to the landlord's brother and they say don't do a condition report. Well, we still would have to regardless of whether we do a bond or take a bond or not. The other change to this is within 10 days of the tenancy ending, we have to do the final inspection in the presence of the other party or invite them to attend. So what that means is property managers, we'll send a letter out to the tenant when they give notice to vacate and we'll say, great, you're moving out on the 15th of May. On the 16th of May, we'll be conducting your final inspection. Would you like to attend? So if you're a landlord that also likes to attend the final inspection, that's absolutely fine, but just be aware that the tenant does get invited as well in the future. So, and we have to just be quick with that bond release and doing those inspections as well. Another part of it is if a tenant does report maintenance on the condition report, that's deemed to be reported maintenance to us, and we have to action those requests within 14 days. So we need to be very quick with our maintenance, because in the future, if we don't action it in 14 days, there is a potential of a tenant to go straight to vacate, to get vacate to determine those repairs. Whereas the current process is that they actually report it to us. If we don't action in 14 days, they get Consumer Affairs out to do a repairs inspection, and then they use the report that's provided to apply to vacate. So it's a much longer process. So we need to ensure that if we're going to you and saying, hey, we've got maintenance at the property, don't you drag it out, please give us instructions quickly. And that way we can get our tradies into the swing of it quickly as well. Urgent repairs. So a couple of things have been added to urgent repairs. So air conditioning has become an urgent repair. It doesn't mean that you have to install it. It just means if you have an air conditioner and it breaks, it's an urgent repair to fix. The other thing is a pest infestation and the presence of mould or damp caused by or related to the building structure. So they've all become urgent repairs. The other thing is that urgent repairs has gone from $1,800 to $2,500. So if your tenant tries to contact you, your agent, and you say no, or you don't get back to them, then the tenant would have a right to organise those urgent repairs as well. So again, just make sure that you are communicating with the agent quickly, and then we can control the process of those urgent repairs rather than pushing it back in the tenant's court, because we much prefer to control it. Non-urgent repairs, so that's the one I said that a tenant can go direct to vacate if they haven't got a resolution on those non-urgent repairs for that 14-day period. So make sure that we're getting quick on those. And we also potentially, I think we're going to have to find new tradesmen and more tradesmen to actually fill the gaps in the business, particularly if we're looking in country areas, you know, and we've got an electrician that manages all the properties, and all of a sudden we've got a couple of hundred properties that need those safety checks done. That's a lot of work. So there's going to be more electricians, plumbers, and potentially tradesmen required as well. Entry to premises. So when we want to enter a premises for whatever reason, we have to either get agreement with the tenant, and we can't get agreement more than 7 days in advance, or serve a notice of entry. So I'll give you a quick overview of what the entry requirements are. It's going to be 24 hours minimum for landlord duty, tenant failed to comply, and family violence. So if we need to get into properties quickly, minimum 24 hours notice. It's going to be a minimum 48 hours notice for open for inspection or private inspections for sales or rentals. With sales, when we want to put a property on the market for sale, we will need to serve a tenant with a notice of intention to sell, which is a form approved by CAV. Haven't got a copy of it yet, but I'll try and get that. And we need to give them 14 days notice before access is proposed. What we also need to do is pay the tenant the prescribed compensation for each sales inspection. And the prescribed compensation has now been set. So if you have a property that is less than $420 a week in rent, it will be $30 per inspection. If it's more than $420 a week, it's half a day's rent per inspection. So say you do an auction campaign and you sell the property in that 4-week period, your agent goes through twice a week for 4 weeks, then it's 8 days of compensation that you owe. So if it's $30 minimum under $420 a week in rent, then it will be 8 times 30 back to the tenant. If your rent's $450 a week, it'll be half a day's rent per inspection, which works out to 4 full days back to the tenant. They haven't told us how we have to pay it back to the tenant yet, so we'll just work out that. I think that'll just be upon negotiation with the tenant. I actually don't mind it. I think I have been a tenant and gone through a sale campaign, and you know, I kept my property nice and let them in whenever they needed. It would have been nice to get a little bit back in my pocket for being, you know, reasonable and helpful during the process, I guess. With sales also, they can go through up to twice a week unless otherwise agreed for a period of no longer than 1 hour per inspection. With rentals, same thing. However, we will be able to go through in the last 3 weeks of the tenancy rather than the last 14 days. So at the moment, we can only show the property in the last 14 days. With the new legislation, we can go through in the last 3 weeks. So it gives you an extra week to try and find a tenant as well. So that's a great change. I'm really happy with that one. If we want to go through and do routine inspections, valuations of properties, or photos and videos for advertising purposes, it is a minimum 7 days notice for those. Now, of course, if you have a tenant that goes, here, mate, come through tomorrow with value at 12 o'clock, you can do it. But if you need to serve a notice, you do have to adhere to those time limits. So if you've sold a property and it's subject to finance for 14 days, and it's a minimum 7 days to get a valuer through, it might push out those subject to finance clauses as well. Renters also need to keep and leave for rented premises reasonably clean. And I guess reasonably clean's always been that really grey area at VCAT, where VCAT member says Saturday morning wipe down, or this is reasonable. We're going to have, again, guidelines and fact sheets around what is reasonably clean. So I think we're going to have a lot more clarity in the future with that. And the way the cleaning came through in the regulations, if the property's been professionally cleaned before a tenant moves in and they've been notified that they must bring it back in that condition, then you can try and push forward for professional cleaning in the end as well. So we'll see how that one plays out. I need it tested at VCAT before I say it's awesome. If you want to terminate a tenancy, there have been some changes with this. So first of all, we've always had a notice to vacate with tenants, which is 120-day no reason, meaning that, in 4 months' time, we want you to vacate the premises. We're not giving you a reason why. But let's be honest, there's always a reason. You're never going to evict an absolutely perfect tenant that pays the rent on time and is perfect in every way. There's always an underlying reason. That notice has been removed. We're not allowed to use it anymore. Now, that got removed at the start of COVID, so we've been working with that for 12 months. We're used to it now anyway. What they have also done is they've changed our end of fixed term tenancy notices to vacate. And this is a notice that I like, and I've used it regularly, where you've had a tenant in a property for a year and you just go, do you know what? It's not quite right. We're just going to finish up the tenancy at the end of the 12-month period and move on. That is only going to be allowed to be used on your initial lease term only. So say you have a tenant in for 12 months and then they sign a second year lease, you can no longer use that notice to vacate. You can, however, serve a notice to vacate for a reason, and it's a 60-day reason under the Act, and that's such as you want to move into it, you want to change your use, you want to demolish it, repair, renovate it, sell it, use it for public purpose. Any of those is a 60-day notice for a reason. Just be aware, though, that you have to follow through for the reason for things like owner move in. So say you think, okay, I'll get my tenant out of the property, serve a notice to vacate in February, and I'll move into it in May. You get the keys back in May, tenant's moved out, and then you go, oh, I don't want to move in anymore. I just want to relet it. If you did do that, you run the risk of tenant finding out, taking it to VCAT and having penalties applied. And the penalties have gone from 60 to 150. So it's almost a $25,000 fine, that one. What you can do is you can get the property cleared at VCAT to get relet, or keep it vacant for 6 months and then you can relet it 6 months from the day the notice was given. So don't think that that's landlords often think that's a get out of jail free card. I'll say I'm going to move in and I won't. Don't. That's just not worth the risk. And, what they're trying to do is just get legitimate reasons, get everyone open and transparent. One other thing is, if you want to move into the property, you do have to supply with documentary evidence with your notices to vacate in future. So if you ring the team and say, I want to move in, the team are going to say, great, go to a police station, get me a stat deck, get it to my office, I'll then serve you notice to vacate. And the reason we have to do documentary evidence is so people aren't giving false reasons and notices to vacate. And it's actually going to stop a lot of people challenging these notices to vacate because they've been given the documentary evidence up front. So I actually think, again, that is a really good change that's coming. There have also been some changes with immediate notices to vacate for damage to the property. It includes safety equipment such as smoke alarms. Danger will now include owners agents, contractors and employees of the owners or agents. So yes, serious acts of violence. Currently that only covers neighbours of premises, and that's an immediate notice to vacate as well. There's been a new one put in as well, which is a 14-day notice to vacate for threats and intimidation. And that is where the tenant has seriously threatened or intimidated the owner, agent, contractor or employee of the owner or agent. And I do know a couple of property managers during COVID that have actually been successful with this one. So no one has to tolerate some of the situations that we get put in. And I think this is the first time in my history in real estate that we've actually been protected under Residential Tenancies Act as well. So again, there are some really good changes. The only other change is death of sole tenant. If the tenant does pass away in a property, it's upon agreement with the notice period. It's currently 28 days. So I think that's a lot fairer as well, because you don't want to be having that sort of angst with relatives if that has been a situation that's come to hand. Oh, one other thing to say, if you serve a notice to vacate on a tenant, they've got a right to give you 14 days return notice, even if their lease isn't up. So say the lease is up in May, you serve it in Feb, they can give you 14 days in Feb and just leave the property and you won't get rent right up until the end fixed term. VCAT's been looking at that for years and doing that at VCAT anyway, so it's just bringing legislation in line with how VCAT acts now. Lease breaks and assignment fees. So if a tenant does break their lease, that's now going to be covered under residential tenancies. And it was always covered in our lease agreements, but it was never covered in the Act as such. So again, really good, takes away that grey area. If you have a tenant that pays a 2-week let fee a landlord who pays a 2-week let fee to lease the property, and your tenant stays there for 6 months out of a 12-month term, then that tenant will give you a pro rata amount back. So they'll cover 1 week of that let fee. You can also charge advertising and rent until the property's relet. So I'm happy that that's actually been popped into the legislation now so that people actually have to follow it. The only other thing I wanted to cover was depreciation on a property. So that's also going to come in under the Residential Tenancies Act. So, for example, you live in your property for 10 years and you're really good at housekeeping and your property's immaculate and your carpet is perfect. And then when you lease the property after the first year, the carpet's heavily soiled and damaged and has to be replaced. If we tried to claim that at VCAT, the carpet actually has no value because the carpet has gone beyond its lifespan in the eyes of VCAT. So just be aware that everything in the property does have a lifespan. Carpet's seen usually around that 8-year mark. So if you have a situation where a tenant does damage something and it's gone beyond its effective lifespan, then technically you can ask the tenant to pay some form of compensation. But if they don't agree, it's not worth going to VCAT because you actually won't get any money for that. And you can download some ATO guides on that off the ATO website. So if you wanted to look up the effective lifespan of items in a property. I just want to quickly go through maintenance again. If you have a situation at a property where your tenant reports maintenance and you don't do it, for example, your tenant can apply to pay rent into the rent special account. So say you've got a roof leak and it's $4,000 to fix and it's an urgent repair. It has to be fixed and you flatly refuse to do it and the agent isn't authorised to get that repair done and the tenant can only spend up to $2,500. A tenant can apply to pay rent into the rent special account, which is an account that's controlled by VCAT. And once VCAT gets $4,000 in that account, then we can organise for the repairs to be undertaken. And the tenant could also apply for compensation back from that account as well. So if you do have something that needs fixing, you just have to fix it coming forward in the new future that we're coming into. And if you have a well-maintained property, you can have a good tenant that pays the rent and looks after the property well as well. So I don't mind all of these kind of loopholes that have been closed. I think it's going to be a much better experience for you as landlords us as property managers and tenants in the future as well, once we get through the busy period over the next year or so to get it all up and running correctly. So I explained before that Consumer Affairs Victoria has issued those guide sheets and the fact sheets and guidelines, and I do recommend downloading them and having a good read of them. Educate yourself as well, so that when the team give you a call and say, hey, this is what's happening, blah, 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 you would know exactly how it's been viewed. And they might even send that information to you prior. So when they have a conversation with you, you know exactly how it is. But the industry's changing. And what I think it will also do is we're going to have better quality properties. And when we have better quality properties, we have better quality tenants who pay the rent on time. We have higher rents as well, because if we put a split system in, that then makes the property more desirable and you have the potential to charge more rent. So although some of these things are going to be a little bit difficult to get your head around in the beginning, just keep it in the back of your mind that because we're going to be maintaining our properties better, we're not going to have those urgent ad hoc things that come up on a weekend that end up costing you $500 when it should have only cost you $100 to fix on a weekday. You know, we're going to be more proactive about the way we look after our properties. And I think that's a really positive step moving forward as well. I also recommend definitely having landlord's insurance. So I own a couple of investment properties and I have landlord's insurance on all of them, because you just don't know. And particularly, you know, when COVID hit, there was a lot of people that didn't have landlord's insurance and they've lost a lot of money. So for the sake of $300 or so a year, just make sure you have the adequate property cover for your particular property. Also consider, if you don't have a really good tenant in that first 12-month period, think about giving them a notice to vacate and trying again in the second year. Because the way to get a tenant out is going to be easier in the first 12 months rather than once you get into the second year and then you've got to do it with a reason. You can serve an end of fixed term on that first term only. And that allows you that trial period to make sure you like the tenant. Now, saying that, my tenants in my place in South Yarra have been there 3 years. They're perfect, would never evict them. My tenant in Geelong West, I think she's been there 4 years now. Put in new aircon for a couple of weeks ago. She painted a wall a couple of weeks ago. She wanted a feature wall. She's a brilliant tenant. Her rent's always on time. She looks after her property beautifully. So they're the sort of people I'm never going to evict. I'm happy for them to stay in my property. But if I had someone in there whose rent wasn't paid on time, who was difficult to deal with, or didn't maintain the property to an acceptable standard, I would consider putting them out after the first year and then starting again. So just keep it in the back of your mind, and the property managers here will obviously advise you along the way. And my only last point, I always wonder if I should say it, but really appreciate your property managers because they work really, really hard for you. And with the amount of work that we've got for ourselves to keep you safe and compliant over the next few years, just be patient with them. We are all learning this along the way as well, because it's massive changes that we're going through. And from an office level, we have to do a lot of compliance work to keep you guys safe as well. We have to change all our documentation, all our processes, all our forms. We have to educate our landlords and our tenants. So there is a big amount of work ahead of us. So just be patient with them, appreciate them as well, because they are here and they are trying to help you as best they can. So I think we had a couple of questions, which I might just check in the chat area. Are outdoor spas including in the must be working laws? Yeah, they are. So if you have a spa in the property and it's currently not working, you either need to get it fixed or removed. So yes, absolutely, spas are included. And someone said, with 5-year leases, are you able to include clauses for rent increase? Yeah, it's almost like a commercial agreement. So you can provide for a rent increase every 12 months. You still need to serve a notice of rent increase, and they still do have a right to challenge whether it's at market or not. But you just set out those in the lease once a year, and that's absolutely fine. Did anyone else? Oh yeah, there was another question. Sorry, I didn't actually scroll down. Okay, Will McKean, this is one for you guys. Will you do an audit for rental properties to identify areas that need to be updated to be in line with the Act? Will you do an audit of the rental properties to identify areas that need to be updated to be in line with the Act?
Yeah, of course. So during our routine inspections, we'll make sure that all of these, all of the requirements are being met every single property.
Yep. Excellent. Did anyone else have any questions, or is there anything that you guys needed to add in as well? No. If anyone does have any other questions, more than happy for you to pop them through. Oh, someone wants to sell. No, I'm joking. They don't really. All right, let me just go here. Does central heating count as heating for the main living area? Absolutely. So if you've got a central heating unit, as long as it's got an outlet in the main living area, that complies, but it does have to have an outlet in that main living area. Do you think there'll be an increase of tenants being given notice to vacate older properties and these properties being sold so they don't need to be updated to meet new standards? Will this create a shortage of rental properties and drive weekly rents up further? Yes, potentially. And look, I'll give you an example. We manage a property in Norlane. We rented out recently for $250 a week. It was getting $210 a week, but our market's improved, so we did pop it up to $250. We had 280 inquiries on that property, and we ended up with over 100 applications. That's massive. Now, with this particular property, there is going to be a substantial amount of work that will need to be done to it to adhere to those minimum standards once this new legislation gets through. We did lease it prior to 29th of March, so it doesn't have to kick in until a new lease signs. So with that particular property, that landlord is actually intending to knock it down and to put 2 units up. So we said to him, we can lease it out now, but we need to end the fixed term, and then you have to get your plans and permits and off you go, because we can't allow that property to be relet in the future unless you're willing to put a heap of money into it, and you don't want to put money into it because you want to knock it down and put units in. So my concern is with some of those sort of properties, and that's I guess a really a property that's quite very old. So it's not just a slightly old property, it really needs work done to it. It's safe and secure now and everything's working, but it just, the wiring in particular is an issue. So I do think it will cause a shortage of properties in that lower price range. And I think that's something that we need to consider as well, because if we had 100 applicants for that property and all of a sudden those $250 a week properties are no longer available because owners have either done the work to them and they're now worth $350, or demolished them and rebuilt units, then where are those people going to go? And that is a concern that I think that I have, and I think a lot of people agree with me on that one as well. Someone else said, what is reasonable wear and tear on timber floors? It's a great one. Consumer Affairs Victoria are going to give us some guidelines on wear and tear as well. We don't have them yet though. Reasonable wear and tear on timber floors. They do have an effective lifespan, and solid timber floors are different to floating floors. And to be honest, I can't remember what it is. I think it's like 15 years for floating, I think, and I'd have to have a look at it. Floors have to be suitable for purpose. So, for example, if you had really softwood floors, it's not a reasonable expectation for a tenant to have to take their shoes off to walk on the floors because it might damage them. Floors have to be fit for purpose. So I guess, reasonable wear and tear, maybe a couple of really light scuffs or marks after a couple of years. If you had massive gouges and that sort of thing, absolutely not reasonable for wear and tear. But I think, you've got to think, can you live reasonably on them and not damage them? That's kind of what you look at. Are rental increases permitted immediately due to the increased maintenance required on properties? No, you can increase the rent every 12 months. So giving the tenants 60 days notice of rent increase as well, and you can't do it whilst they're under a fixed term agreement. So you will have to wait for that. Can you claim for damage to gardens and turf by pets? Yeah, pets is a really fun one. If you didn't get the damage claim at VCAT, then you would definitely be looking to your insurance provider to cover some of those claims. And there's insurance companies out there that cover pets up to like $65,000 now. So there's a substantial amount that you can claim. It would be up to VCAT to decide whether or not that's fair and reasonable. And you also have to look at it and say, what was it like when they moved in? How old was the turf when they moved in, and that sort of thing as well. But gardens are always quite tricky to make claims at VCAT. I think I answered them all. You don't have any more questions? Anyone want to close off?
If anyone has any further questions, just keep sending them through, and if we need to, we'll jump to Hayley at the end, and we've also got Luke from Consumer Affairs. Right now, we might quickly jump to Michael, who is just going to give us a quick wrap up of the sales market.
Thanks heaps, Tabitha, and a big thanks to Hayley and Luke for all your time with presenting to us and our landlords. It's obviously a lot of information for us to take in, but I'm sure the property management team will be giving landlords regular updates and a good summary of what's going to change moving forward at the end of March. So just wanted to give a quick snapshot of how the market is progressing, obviously this year and moving forward after Christmas. The COVID year was an interesting one. We actually thought it could have gone the other way, but Bendigo grew by about 9.9% as far as growth went for 2020. So, and it'll be interesting to see the couple of months that we've had this year have been really strong. So we haven't seen the quarterly results come through yet, but it'll be really interesting because we've had some really good energy in the marketplace and really low days on market and quite a bit of competition per property. I'll just share my screen so I can show you a little bit of information just about some of the stats that we've seen. It's been really interesting to see the search volumes on realestate.com increase. In the rent section for Bendigo Greater Region, we saw 44,000 searches for rent in February 2020, and that's grown this year, or January 2021, to 72,000. So there's been an increase of 61% for search volumes in the rent section on realestate.com. So you can just see the massive influx of tenants that are looking to rent a property in Bendigo. Moving to the buy section, there was 175,523 searches in February 2020, and January 2021 we saw 338,586, which was an increase of 92%. So it just gives you a bit of an indication on how the market's going in Bendigo. The stock levels are the interesting one that we've seen. You look at that 92% increase, talking about the buy section, but there's a 38% less stock levels available. So you look at the old supply and demand, you've got plenty of buyers looking, but the supply is down by 38%. So that's really contributed to quite a few, results that we haven't seen before in the Bendigo real estate market. So it's really, pleasing to see, especially for our landlords that have got investment properties, to see the growth we've had in the last sort of 18 months. Bendigo's traditionally been a sort of a slow growth and a long-term prospect, but in the last 12 months we've really seen some good growth in the area, which is great. So looking at the average views per listing as well in the Bendigo Greater Region, there's a 43% increase from last year in the views per listing in the rent section. And then there's a 96.7% increase in the last 12 months with the buy section. So yeah, going back not only to the people searching Bendigo Greater Region, but the average views per listing has really increased as well, which is pleasing to see. So yeah, for any of our landlords, if you're wanting an up-to-date market appraisal as well, all our team members are happy to help. So we can certainly give you a bit of an idea on what your property might be worth in the market. It's always good to be kept up to date with that, and feel free to send any questions through on the chat function. If anyone's got any questions, just send them through shortly.
Thanks so much for that, Michael. So yes, again, if anybody has any questions, just keep sending them through. Thank you all so much for joining in. I know it was probably really overwhelming with all of the information that we've spoken about, but just know that anyone at McKean McGregor is all here to help everybody get through it. We'll all be fine. But as Hayley said, there's quite a few changes. So just be patient with us, but we will handle everything as best we can. The presentation tonight we have recorded, so we will send that out to everybody so you've always got it, as well as Hayley's slideshow, because unfortunately technology got the better of us and we couldn't figure it out. So I think that probably wraps us up for tonight. Well, look, thank you again for joining in, and we'll speak to you all soon.